He's Dave, and I'm Dallas, and we have opinions on just about everything. Sometimes they're on point, and sometimes they go down better with a glass of wine. Join us. This is the Wine and Podcast.
Welcome, everyone, to Wine and, the podcast where we pair wine with entertainment, delude ourselves into thinking you want to hear what we have to say about different pieces of pop art and culture, but know for a fact that you need to hear what we have to say about wine, because who knows anything about wine? We sure don't. Well, that's not true. We actually totally do, and we can help you find the perfect pairing for whatever it is you're planning to read, watch, or listen to. But before we get started, please make sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. It does help this podcast grow and reach new listeners. At least, please leave a rating and a review as well, because that also helps us grow and reach new listeners. And leave a 5-star review if you're going to leave a review. Don't quibble, don't equivocate. Just leave that 5-star review. You know you love us. Why else are you leaving a review? Oh, you hate us? Well, then don't leave a review. Send us a peevish email instead. Send that to wine, the letter N, P-O-D, wineandpod@gmail.com. We will take your feedback very seriously. Don't leave that review if you hate us. Just send the email. All right. And you can also find us on Substack, wineand.substack.com, where you'll be the first to know when new episodes drop, get in-depth show notes, sometimes uncut versions of these episodes, bonus pairings, articles, chats, pairing directories, wineand.substack.com. Be a cool kid. Drink the wine cooler aid. Join us on Substack. Okay, folks, today we are chit-chatting about the latest Hellboy movie as part of our Spooktober event, Hellboy, the Crooked Man, the brand new reboot of the franchise based on the limited series / storyline of the same name from the Hellboy comic books. Crooked Man is an attempt to make a lower budget, roughly $20 million, for a folk horror-themed series of films featuring a younger Hellboy. We'll see how this first one does. Directed by Brian Taylor of Mom and Dad fame, the Nick Cage, Selma Blair movie, if anyone saw that, shout out, and the TV show Happy, ! Fame as well. Brian Taylor is also one half of the Neville Dean Taylor duo, which you might remember directed and wrote Crank and Crank 2 and Ghost Rider Spirits of Vengeance back in the day. And I swear by Ghost Rider Spirits of Vengeance. So I was super hyped to get into this Hellboy. Let me tell you, the film was written by Taylor alongside Hellboy creator Mike Mignola and regular Hellboy comic writer Christopher Golden, and stars Jack Kesey as Hellboy, Jefferson White as Tom Farrell, Martin Bassendale as the Crooked Man, Joseph Marcel as Reverend Watts, Leah McNamara as Effie Kolb, a very important character in the comics. There is actually a sequel, The Return of Effie Kolb, Hannah Margetson as Cora Fisher, and the actual second lead in the movie, a character created just for the movie, Adeline Rudolph as Bobby Joe Song. The film was released in limited theatrical in the UK and other parts of Europe, and was released VOD in North America on October 8th, just 2 days prior to the recording of this episode. So with us today, with me in Dallas today, are two very special guests with us, both hailing from the indie comic book world, as does Hellboy himself. So we have with us Jon Westoff, publisher of Part-Time Comics and writer of Drumsticks of Doom, Child Possession Services, DEPOWERED, Bulletproof Chicken, and L.C.S., an acronym that usually stands for Local Comic Shop, but this is a post-apocalyptic tale, and it also kind of stands for Last Comic Shop, and all about comic collecting in the post-apocalypse. And with us here today is also Matt Harding. Matt is a Bay Area comic artist and writer who's worked on projects such as Deadbeats 2, All the Devils Are Here, Hamilton, GWAR, the Not Forgotten Anthology, Rick and Morty, and Stan Lee's Lucky Man Bracelet Chronicles. He writes, illustrates, edits, and animates comics in a variety of mediums. All right, gents, welcome to Wine and. It's so good to have you with us here today. And are you stoked to talk about Hellboy, the Crooked Man? Jon, are you stoked?
The only answer is yes.
Hi. I'm very stoked, or otherwise I would have faked that I was sick or something, because I don't usually like to talk about things I don't like.
He's like, yeah, Wine and, I don't know, like, oh, Hellboy. Okay, now I'm interested. Matt, are you stoked?
Unbelievably stoked, yeah.
I had a lot of fun watching this, and I had a lot of fun drinking and watching this movie at the same time.
Nice. So as a question for both of you, actually, to get us started off, and this was not a part of the litany of questions I sent you in advance to prepare for, so this is just going to be off the cuff, but are you two much of drinkers in real life? I forget if you're much of a drinker, John. I should know this answer, but I don't know this answer. But do you partake of beers? Do you partake of wine? Do you partake of canned cocktails? We'll take White Claw. We take White Claw. We had Travis Gibb on, and we had to go with White Claw with him.
Oh, no.
So as refined or unrefined as your palate is, are you regular drinkers? John, do you drink very often?
No, I'm a once a month guy, maybe sometimes even less if I don't have something social going on. I'm not much of in my old age, but I definitely don't partake in the White Claw. I'll just throw it out there.
You'll do. So when you drink, what do you drink? What do you like to drink?
Captain and Coke, bourbon and soda, beer. I like.
That's a mid-century man right there.
Pilsners, wheat beers. I like Sassons. I'm kind of more into the wimpier beers than the IPAs and the stouts and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And Matt, how about you? You much of a drinker on the regular?
Well, it sounds like John and I would actually make pretty good drinking buddies, because not often, like as I've gotten older, I've just kind of one or two here and there, casual whiskey and Coke, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Whiskey and Coke. We are, so that's where we're starting from, folks. We'll see what they wind up pairing with Hellboy the Crooked Man. So to get us started directly into Hellboy itself. So
it sounded like you said Hellboy the Cricket Man, by the way.
The Cricket Man. Playing cricket, that would be awesome. Hellboy as the ultimate cricket player. I would love to see that. But
if you know Hellboy's history, he's from England, so he could.
He is. I was going to say that would have fit in the Neil Marshall film as well, because I don't know. So have all of us seen all the the 4 live action Hellboy feature films? I'm assuming the answer is going to be yes.
Started watching 3, didn't finish 3.
I did not bother with the David Harbour one. No, I did not.
Okay, interesting.
I've watched all of them and the cartoons too.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
I know John's seen the cartoons as well. And Dallas, don't call it 3. It's a reboot. It's not 3. No 3, no 4. Let's not put the numbers, especially because people are so bummed that Guillermo del Toro was not able to make the proper Hellboy 3 and finish his trilogy. So as everyone should know who is listening to this podcast, there have been 4 live action feature films now to date. There were the original 2 Guillermo del Toro films in 2004-2008, Hellboy, and then Hellboy 2, The Golden Army, if I'm remembering the title correctly. Mm-hmm. Then the 2019 Hellboy, to confuse things, just Hellboy again, but you have to know it's the new one, and it's David Harbour starring as Hellboy and directed by Neil Marshall of Dog Soldiers fame. And I had never seen that before preparing for this podcast, but I watched it a couple days ago for the first time just to see what all the not praise, but the opposite of praise, to see what all the dishing of the dirt of this movie was. And I'm going to go on record here and say that Hellboy, 2019 Hellboy with David Harbour, it's not bad. It's different than the Guillermo del Toro's. It's trying for a tone and aesthetic. A couple people who were panning on it were like, "Oh, they tried to make Hellboy into Deadpool," and I'm like, "Oh, calm down. It is not. They are not. It is not that bad. They're not making him that funny or that off the cuff, or he's not fourth wall breaking or anything like that." But they definitely were trying to go for a Marvel movie style. I could tell, like with a lot of quipping, a lot of humor, and they even had the 2 cutscenes like during post-credit sequences, just like a Marvel movie. I was like, "Damn, guys, you are like not even trying to hide it. You want this to be a Marvel franchise with Hellboy." Now that said, I've gone on. I'm a Letterboxd user. If anyone here knows what Letterboxd is, the film review website and whatnot. And like it is littered with nothing but 1/2-star and 1-star reviews for the David Harbour Hellboy, and that's a little histrionic. Like it is there in the course of bad cinema out there, and not even so bad it's good, but like bad cinema. I'm like no, because once you go to 1/2-star, it's like, guys, there's nowhere further to fall. Like this is not the bottom of the barrel at all. I'd give it 3. It's a well made. It does try to do way too much in 2 hours. But it's the opposite of bloated, or it's the opposite of what a lot of TV shows and I think like 2.5-hour Marvel movies often get, which is like, why is this 30 minutes of this could have been trimmed? And this would have been, and Hellboy 2019 is like, this needed an extra hour to have this plot in here. Like, this is nutter butters how much they're cramming in here. Now, I do think it could have used a rewrite to like not try to do so much, like focus, folks. Like, it doesn't have to be the entire Hellboy epic in 1 2-hour movie. But I liked it. And now I've seen all 4. I have not seen the animated movies. So John, you might want to throw in I'm about to ask everyone what their favorite movie of the franchise is, and we're going to start there. And John, you might want to throw in the animated movies. If you do, fair game, go for it. But also tell me what is your favorite live action one as well, because I'm not counting the animated movies. I'm just counting the 4 live action. So John, kick us off here. What is your favorite of the 4? And do the animated movies top all of them so far?
Well, I will say I haven't watched the animated movies in a while. I do remember enjoying them quite a bit. They probably would have been neck and neck with the first Ron Perlman, Guillermo del Toro movie for, all this time. Although, again, I didn't partake in the 2019. I do understand that most people, like you said, either want to leave a 1 or a half-star review or a 5-star review. We only go to leave reviews when we're excited or really hate something. So it was just mostly because my peers were saying, yeah, it's not really worth it. So, when people that you respect their opinion of say skip it, why even put these images of Hellboy that I don't want in my head? I was really excited for Harbor's rendition. I thought he looked cool. I thought it was going to be really good.
He does look really cool. Yeah.
And it was actually really, Mignola came out afterwards and kind of, to paraphrase, was kind of bemoaning ever entering into Hollywood, and he just wants his creation back. And that kind of made me see, well, if he's not into it, then I'm not into it.
To be fair, he hated Del Toro's second Hellboy.
He's not fond of the second one.
He did. And that one, I think I've only watched that one maybe twice all the way through. So I don't remember it being great, if I even sat through it all in one sitting. So I really like the first one. I like the animated ones. They're pretty close, but I'm going to say that this one is the best.
Whoa.
Even over the animated ones. I do believe Hellboy belongs in the animated universe, and they should have continued those. That's where I think he would do best, but especially with this big epic story. That's right. It's funny. I hear you say they tried to cram so much, whereas in Crooked Man they didn't. They got the right feel, because you're never going to get to that whole arc. It's too much, right? So why even? I mean, there's some seeds in there we'll talk about, but I'll say Crooked Man, and again, it could be just the excitement of talking to you guys about it, or that it's new. But I thought it was really well done. All
right, Matt, how about you?
All right, I'm going to start off by saying I'm a huge Hellboy fan of the comics, the movies, everything. So any disparaging things that I say actually kind of work towards what I like about Hellboy, right? I think that there's a lot of mess to everything that's Hellboy. The comics, if you go to read the comics, they're kind of a mess. You don't know where to start with like BPRD and stuff. You're like, I don't know there's some stories that are small, there's some that are big and epic. You actually have to like really get in there and do some research. You can't be a casual reader of it too much. You know what I mean? And thinking along that line, there are things that I think worked and things that didn't work with each movie. So I was trying to think of like what my favorite thing is, Del Toro is one of my favorite directors. So I really like his versions of it, but at the same time, they're not really like the Hellboy comic Hellboy, right? I mean, they're like his version of it. And I love the second one because I really like all the creative stuff he did with like the troll market and just all that stuff. It was just creativity thrown into a movie in many different ways. And I'd have to say that because of that, as far as like a live action Hellboy goes, I like that one a lot. But the 2019 one, as a fan of the comic, I liked. I was one of maybe the only people who really, really liked that movie. Like, I loved it. I actually went there and I was just geeking out the whole time. I was like, oh, there's Baba Yaga's, house, and there's the Wild Hunt, and there's this, and there's the, the Silver Lantern Club, and like freaking out, Lobster Johnson, But I went with my wife and I went with her grandfather, so my grandfather-in-law. And when we got out of that movie, he was like, what the... Am I allowed to swear on this
as much
podcast?
As yes.
He was like, "What the fuck happened in this movie? Like, I don't even know what I was watching." Like,
right.
if you didn't know these things, you
You
went
had
into
all the
that,
context. Yeah.
Which
Yeah,
would have
they're
been very
throwing things-
entertaining to watch someone with zero context, you know.
it was, yeah. So like, because it did his origin, right? And they go back and they're showing how the Nazis are, doing this ritual. But then there are these like Nazis that are all like superhero like, and he was like, oh, I don't get these. And then all of a sudden there's a Lobster Johnson guy showing up, and he was just lost. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh man, now I
and
want to watch it.
I mean, he liked the guns and stuff, but that was about it.
Like
That was about it. Yeah, he liked the guns and explosions. But I liked it, and then we'll get into more of the newest movie, but I do feel like as a direction for Hellboy to go into, this one said it. Like this is, I'm down for these like Sci-Fi Channel, like B movie short story.
That's exactly
Hellboy
what my
things,
first note says. Like, this is a $20 million sci-fi episode, and I'm here for it.
Yeah. I'm into it.
Interesting.
Like, it doesn't need to be a superhero epic movie, right? Like,
Right.
It really doesn't. The cartoons are great, the video games there were good things about the game. Like, they had a video game that had Bruce Campbell playing Lobster Johnson. That was fun, so like little bits and things of each one. So it's hard for me to really choose what I like the most,
But if you had to lean towards one, do you think the 2019 just tickled you the most in all the ways? I know I'm not letting you off the hook.
From a fan
Gun to the
perspective.
head. You know what? I'm actually going to say that Gun to the Head, this newest one.
Okay.
I'm gonna say it. Like,
Okay.
I love Del Toro and stuff, but as far as Hellboy goes, I feel like this was the one.
Okay. Very cool. Dallas, how about you, man?
I'm of two minds. I just remember that initial. I was so excited when the first Del Toro films came out. Those first two, like, it was just really great to see that character on the big screen and to see Del Toro's, his sort of filigree, his sort of handiwork, because it does kind of take it into his fantasy aesthetic. I did not stick around for the second act of, and I will say it again, Argue with Your Mother 3. And so I probably should check. I will check back in with that film after we do this. But for pure cinematic appeal, it's the first one for me. I just enjoyed walking into that mind, that sort of palette. But I will say, in terms of relaunching and setting the bar for a new launch, I suppose, this latest one, it is really pedestrian and it's really terrestrial, and in comparison to where the story's gone in the past, it is really terrestrial and pedestrian. It's the story of...
So grounded. Grounded is the word you're looking for there, I think.
No, pedestrian. It's pedestrian. It's pedestrian. I mean,
pedestrian is simple.
It's a very simple story. It's a pretty simple.
I don't know about. I don't know if it's a simple story, man.
It's a pretty simple story.
I don't know if I agree with
It's a
that.
pretty simple story. But what I'm saying is, in terms of giving us a baseline, a jumping off point that, sky's the limit, I think this is kind of a great relaunch. It just is. It hits all the notes. Like I said, Dave and I, we kind of bonded over our mutual love of not necessarily shitty movies or bad movies, but adequate film, well done film, narratives. And I think they really took that sort of dark, sinister, terrestrial and pedestrian undertone of this Hellboy story and played it well and effectively.
The first one is your favorite, though. Still, the OG Del Toro.
The first one is the one of the four I would probably watch again just for shits and giggles. So I'll go with that.
Okay, fair.
Yeah,
fair. I think for me, kind of to echo what a couple of you have already said, I think all of us have pretty much said, this new one, I think for the first 2/3 of it, I was like, oh no, I think this is going to be my favorite of all of them. I think it's going to trounce even the Del Toros. the Del Toros, and I put on the first 40-ish minutes of the first one this morning just to double check, because I have not revisited
Me
the Del
either,
Toros in a long time. So I was like, you know what? Is this just my memory telling me the Del Toros are really, really good? And maybe I do need to see how dated they are. And so I have issues with this movie in the final act that really kind of, I was like, I was with you, man. And then I feel like this one drops the ball a little bit to where I was a little more reticent to call this one the best. So I put on the OG 2004 Del Toro Hellboy. And yeah, I got to say, I think that's still my favorite, because that one, I mean, watching those first 40 minutes again, I was like, Jesus Christ, it's not the comics. It is a superhero movie of that time. You know what I mean? Like how we made superhero movies pre-Marvel, and it feels very much that, but it's kind of a flawless version of
well
that.
executed.
It's singing on every level, and the script is so fucking tight. And like every line is like, and the performances that some of these actors are giving, like even just that opening at the Nazi base camp during World War II, and even just some of the throwaway U.S. Army members and I'm like, they're in a better movie than they are actually in. Like they're all really giving it their all. This is great. So I got to give it back to the OG Del Toro. Now, I have not rewatched the second Del Toro in a long, long time. I don't think I've seen it since the theaters, because I hated it when I saw it in the theaters. It was not my bag. I know Del Toro is all about the creature building and the world building, and that's like where he shines more often than not, especially these days. But for me, Del Toro, after Pan's Labyrinth, I kind of like, for me, that's where he peaked on all of that. And ever since, I've been like, okay, man, what else you got? Like, you're going to do more than just creature build, right? And like, he's such a creature builder that I'm like, okay, I'm still waiting for the next Del Toro movie where the story sings like it does in the first Hellboy and Pan's Labyrinth. And I feel like it hasn't in a long, long time. He got a little too into the world building and creature building, and I think he focuses so much there. I mean, you could say the same about so many auteurs. Like Ridley Scott is another guy who, like, he's so much about the aesthetic and the visual and what he wants to put on screen and how that feels, that often his scripts suffer for the same. He's kind of on record as being like, yeah, the script, whatever the fuck. Yeah. I'm really not that into it. Like, I can't care enough. And you can tell with some of these guys, like, it's sort of like, come on, guys, it's one missing piece. Can you just slip that in and you've got a full picture, a full frame, and it's like it'll be everything in the kitchen sink if you can just pay enough attention to that one final piece. And I feel like Del Toro has also been in this mode in the second part of his career. But that first Hellboy, still the best. Now, I do think this new Hellboy is my second favorite at this point. Which I think, let's dovetail this into the next question, because when I first heard, and I'll start this one off for everybody, when we first heard that this would be a lower budget, more horror flavored entry, what were our initial thoughts? Like, how did we go into this new movie? What were our expectations? What was our thinking? For me, I thought it was fucking brilliant. I thought that was exactly what this franchise needed, especially because it just kept struggling at the box office as a big bloated superhero epic. And we'll also get to what we thought about it not getting a theatrical release in North America. But, you know, if it was going, like, doing it for 20 million and doing it in its more folk horror themes, which a lot of the comics are, like, there are some epic storylines in Hellboy, but a lot of them are much more dialed back, you know, aesthetic horror pieces, where it's very much drenched in mood and atmosphere. And the goings on in the story are like, you know, The Crooked Man is a 3-issue limited series. It's not a long epic storyline. It's very straightforward. It's got a lot of creativity in it. And there's a lot of creativity, I think, in this Crooked Man movie as well. But yeah, my initial thoughts there was, I was like, perfect. I was going into this thinking this is exactly what the franchise needed. Let's actually reverse this a little bit. Matt, you start us off after me. What were your thoughts on this new approach?
So when somebody had sent me the trailer to this movie without telling me what it was. Like, I didn't realize I was watching a Hellboy trailer. I thought it was like, because I'm also a fan of like the Conjuring movies and stuff. So I thought it was, I actually thought it was like Conjuring the beginning or something, you know? and so, you know, I'm watching the trailer and then Hellboy shows up and I actually, now keep in mind, I like the movie, but I actually started laughing. Like, I was like, what the heck? Is that Hellboys? Like, is there a Hellboys in this? And it made me start thinking, like, I thought it was a parody actually at first, right? At that very first trailer, just because it was so low budget and everything. Kind of like how Saturday Night Live did the Mario Kart. That kind of thing. And it made me think like that, you know, my first reaction was, this is not good, right? And then so I went into it thinking this isn't going to be a good movie. And I think for the first 15 minutes, maybe even 20, I was put off by how low budget it was. Like, I'm not going to lie, I was, right? Like, there's a scene where he's walking and you can actually see on his abs.
His
like,
abs like squeak around the rubbery.
And the chest plate as well.
They fold.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it all folds. Like, you could tell that it's not real, right? And it kind of took me out of it a little bit. But I think it's when you get to the church, when you meet the priest, and you're seeing that actor like just kill
That's
it.
the butler from Fresh Prince, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Is it? Yeah. That's when I was like, you know what? I kind of love this movie. Like, I actually really like this movie. You know, the fight with the spider. Like, I think part of it is that they hit you with the worst that the movie, in my opinion, is going to give you right off the bat, right? Like, they tear that Band-Aid off. They give you a bunch of weird angles from the camera. They give you that spider. They give you the actor who plays the other guy, the disposable
dead guy number one
guy, like dead guy number and he comes in and he delivers like just probably the worst dialogue in the movie. Like, they hit you with the worst it's going to get, in my opinion. What's he say? He says, "Oh, look, he's getting the heebie-jeebies." And
I am the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah. I was like, "Oh,
come
no,
on, buddy,
like,
come on."
Like, this is, but then it kind of like, it almost like self-realizes along the way, and it almost becomes like a movie that I can't tell you why I like it so much. But by the time you're getting to the end of this movie, I really liked it. Like, every line was really funny. I like that Hellboy wasn't even really the main character, because I feel like a lot of Hellboy stories are kind of like that. He's just a jobber.
He's just there.
He's just a jobber who happens to be there and is going to punch something and help people.
Especially those first 40 or 50 years, he was just a jobber traveling around the country. As a matter of fact, in the comic, that's how this starts. He was just wandering around and found a small town.
In the Crooked Man comic, the whole spider part's not even in it. So that kind of threw me off a little bit also, is because the whole reason that they were there was added, you know, and I was kind of like, I don't know about this, but then they get to the thing, they see the kid on the ground and all that, and the witch ball and all that stuff, and they kind of get into it, you know. I don't think there need to be a big cast, so I think that was good. And like I said, you know, my first answer, I kind of dig the low quality original Evil Dead, you know, the first movie. That was still kind of, you know, trying to be serious, you know what I mean? Like, I kind of dig that quality to it, and I could watch 20 of these, you know what I mean? I could watch one of these every weekend, you know? A whole series.
Yeah. John, how about you? What were your thoughts going into this one?
Well, I kind of groaned at first because, you know, it's like, oh, geez, didn't we just have another movie? I didn't even remember when the last one had come out, and I was like, oh, this thing is just in hell. He just said he doesn't want to do a movie. Why is he doing it? Well, but then I found out that he was co-writing it, and Christopher Golden, you know, later I found out, who is a huge part of this entire universe. He deserves a huge part of the credit, him and John Arcudi. And I thought that was a great choice. And I did not watch the trailer. I said, you know what? I like to do that anymore. I'm not going to watch the trailer. I'm just going to go in. Once I heard it was low budget, I kind of winced a little bit, but then I started thinking, well, wait a minute, that makes sense for Hellboy.
Right.
And when I heard the title, I was excited, because the first Hellboy comic I ever read was The Crooked Man.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
This was actually, I was first introduced through the movies, and I was not a good comics reader and didn't read a ton of independent at the time. A good friend of mine was a huge Hellboy fan. He's like, "You've never read Hellboy? Let me mail you some comics." So this was the first one I read. And I've only read it once probably since in trade. And so I was like, okay, I know The Crooked Man. You know, the story sticks with you, the creepy Richard Corbin art. You know, that was the heart of it.
Yeah,
But
Richard Corbin, R.I.P., but incredible artist.
And I didn't remember a ton about the story. So, but I was like, I remember it being creepy, and there was this church, and you know, the Crooked Man with his broken neck. So I was like, okay, I'm in, right? I'm like, I'm not going to watch anything. I'm just going to go in. I started seeing the stills, and then I was like, it looks really bad in the stills. It looks like his costume doesn't look good. He doesn't look great as Hellboy. But we'll get into as we talk about the movie. You know, I think all of my fears, most of my fears went away once I saw the movie. So I went in with, you know, I was kind of,
you were trepidatious. As a matter of fact, coming in.
I was. And honestly, if you hadn't invited me here, I probably wouldn't have rented it right away or bought it. I would have waited, see what people
you never
say.
saw 2019 either. So yeah, that goes to show how you're like, I'm going to wait to find out if everyone loves this thing or not.
And I do. I love Hellboy. I have a Hellboy shelf over here with all my Hellboy stuff. He's one that universe is one of my favorite, especially Johann Kraus and Sir Edward Grey Witchfinder, and I have all the hardcovers and everything. So to be honest with you, it's one of those series that, like, when I saw Spider-Man 3 in the theater, I said to myself, I'm never going to look forward to my favorite thing being on screen again. I'm not going to care. And I did the same thing with Hellboy.
3 that much?
That's
another one I'm very apologetic about.
I've come around to it, but I think being in my mid-20s and being a huge Venom fan and having a Venom tattoo, I was like, Venom, yes, this is the time for me. And then I was like, womp womp. And so I said, with Hellboy being, you know, another on that altar, and I'll probably be the same with the Max series when it comes out, I'm probably not as interested in making that. But this movie made me interested. So the trailer I didn't watch, but, you know, seeing the title I think was a big home run. It's like, okay, you told us exactly what you want to do with this series. You're going to make it the grounded horror, you know, suspense that really Hellboy should be, and explore a different part of his history, you know. So that was cool.
Right. And just so you know, I'll just wanted to say, just so you know, John, most people, like critics at the very least, I don't know about audience reaction quite yet, but critics don't like this new Hellboy either. It's mostly been universally panned. So FYI on the 2019, you might want to give it a check out as well, because this is apparently something where I think Hellboy as a franchise is just like post Del Toro. People just love to shit on it. Like, I'm starting, like, because even though they have flaws, I'm like, the way in which these movies get shit on is, I'm like, this is extreme. Like, this is a weird mob hysteria going on here of like how hated and loathed
which
these
I
movies
get that
are.
with,
they don't
like,
make
the
sense.
Joker, but what I get that with, like, the Joker, all right? Batman's been overdone. Why are they piling on Hellboy? You know, give it a
I
chance.
just think it has a lot to do with how
that
the shadow that Del Toro's renditions really cast at that moment in time. Was this pre-Marvel or parallel to Marvel?
Yeah, it's Sam Raimi Spider-Man all over again. Everybody thinks they were going to get the best version, and they never got it.
Exactly.
So now they're mad.
Yeah.
It's
And Matt,
like that with the video games. It's like that with the video games too. It's like that with Hellboy just in general. I think, like, critics, and that kind of actually the question I was going to ask you, and I think part of the problem with it is that so my favorite Hellboy book is the first one I ever read. And I don't know, and it sounds kind of like, and the reason I wanted to bring that up is because John was saying his favorite one is Crooked Man. That's the first one he ever read, right? Your first introduction to it kind of sets the bar. Yeah. And I think Hellboy specifically is kind of like that. Like, even though, so the first one I read, I think was, it was the volume number 4. It was the one with Lobster Johnson. They go to the castle. They're, you know, killing Nazis, right? And I love that one. And to this day, it's my favorite one. And it was I found it in a bargain bin at like Comic-Con or something, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense why you love the 2019 movie then, because that does match that flavor of Hellboy, one version of Hellboy, more so than the other movies. Yeah,
it does. Yeah, and so I kind of feel like everybody's first like venture into the Hellboy universe, it kind of like it sets the standard for what you want it to be or what you're expecting, and then everything you see after that is so different from that first one that you don't know how to feel about it. You know what I mean? And that's a theory, at least. I don't know.
No, I agree. I think that makes sense.
Scientist.
Yeah, I think the Del Toro version, because that was, and it's one thing, like if the Hellboy movie was not like if the Del Toro version was not beloved, if it didn't work out, if not many people saw it, if no one liked it when they did see it, that would be another story. But most people, at least at the time, really, really liked it. The second movie did even better. And so I think the reboots are sort of like, if it ain't broke, why are we fixing it kind of a thing, and people just aren't getting past that to some degree. But Dallas, we haven't gotten to you yet. What were your thoughts coming into this?
I will be honest, I checked out of the Hellboy sort of arena after leaving number 3 or 2019 halfway through. So when this actually came up for the show, I remember reading it on the list.
I texted Dallas and I'm like, we're going to do Hellboy. And the only thing he texted back was, fine.
Mostly because I didn't realize that a new one had been promoted. Somehow it just escaped my brain. And so when I went to go watch this, I was like, God, David Harbour looks... I thought I was watching this for the second time and going to make it all the way through. But yeah, truly, I really honestly did. And so
you really were not paying attention to the 2019 one.
No,
Jesus.
at all. Once I'm done, it's done. But I remember watching the first 15 minutes of this film thinking, okay, first of all, that's not David Harbour. And so I was like, oh, okay, this is a new film. Got it. But that first 15 minutes of this film just kind of blew my mind with how ridiculously pedestrian it was. The first 15 minutes was so pedestrian because they really were just meandering through the tale. They just were meandering through. And the other thing that bugged the absolute shit out of me, a sensory thing, was if you guys noticed, maybe you didn't, the score. The score is so heavy-handed. Every beat has driving music behind it that is competing for the dialogue. It is a problem. I challenge you to go back and pay attention if you did. But it's a thing, that first 15 or 20 minutes. So after I got through...
The dialogue's not very important.
No, not at all.
Let's give it that.
First of all, why are you making a movie? But I will say the first 15 minutes, to your point, John, it was so silly. It was silly. It was just so silly. It was just silly that I was just in just to see where this thing was going to go. I would see how much crazier this was going to get. So, yeah, my expectations for this film were pretty low because I thought it was a different film.
Okay. Well, Jesus. Next time
my favorite,
I will...
sorry. I was just saying my favorite line was where she goes, we're screwed. And he says, screwed, chewed, and tattooed. I was like,
yeah. I know. I'm like, that makes no sense. Okay.
But that is Hellboy.
Nice rhyming scheme.
Hellboy is like an old dad out of the 70s, like he's so that's how he is to me.
He's all, I mean, the thing about this version of Hellboy is, he was all attitude, or like, but it was also kind of, and I think it was on purpose, like he's fronting the attitude, right? Like he's still young. He's not even that cool. One of the things that kind of drove me nuts about that opening spider attack scene is I kept like, it kills the one dead guy, number one. And then the girl is almost killed like multiple times. And like Hellboy is kind of just sort of standing there. And I'm like, Hellboy, I'm like, start like move and help people and do. And he's just kind of like standing there, like trying to be cool. And I'm like, no, dude, man, like fight, get going. And he gets going a little bit later after the girl almost dies twice. But it was like, he was a little overly like slow to respond to things. And he gets better as the movie goes on, but it was interesting that I can't remember if it was John or Matt who made this point. I think it was John. The point of how sometimes Hellboy is just there. Like he's not the point of the story, right? And in this case, he's there, and it takes him a while because he could just walk away at any time. Like he's so not entwined with everything that's going on. Like everyone, the bad guys would let him go too. They'd be like, yeah, fuck off. We don't want you here either. If he just wanted to leave, they would let him leave. And I think it's that moment when he comes out and stops the guy from, his bone? Okay, the lucky bone, right? Lucky bone. And he comes out and he's like, no. no more deals.
Yeah.
Like we're going to take care of this together. Like now I'm involved. And from that point forward, he's very
It's
involved.
like he's looking for a reason to care, which I actually appreciate in terms of the character arc, because that is very clear. It's clear that this version of Hellboy is looking for a reason to care and help,
Yes.
which is good.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think, again, going back to the comics, I think they tried to fit that in, to one story. Really, that happens over time. He doesn't understand where he fits. He's not human. Who is he? He saws off his horns because he's embarrassed. So that is a lot of Hellboy. They did kind of force it, and I was kind of noticing, like, why is Hellboy such a dick? And then later, like you said, you realize, oh wait, they're making that part of his. His
So
cover-up.
one. Never mind. I'll wait on that. Go on.
You'll wait on that? Okay.
So the villains also, like, the villains don't care about him. Like, and I thought that that's really cool about the comic, and this movie showed it, is when he was like, well, what about me? And they're like, oh, he doesn't care about you. Like, you're whatever. He's not afraid of you, whatever. Like, let's go back to talk about Tom,
Right. He's like, I haven't made a deal with you. I don't get your soul. Like, fuck off. Like, what are you even doing here?
And I have to feel that was Mignola's heavy influence, because that is how he is. Like, everyone's like, oh yeah, I seen you on Life magazine or whatever. Like, just this red thing that walks around the earth. But
that's a good point, John, because they do make reference to that like 2 or 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
It is very sort of flippant. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So on that note, next question for everybody. How well did they blend? Because this is a folk horror, kind of Blumhousey, as mentioned before. Matt mentioned that this was, when he started the trailer, he thought this was like Conjuring the beginnings. And so this has this sort of folk horror, Blumhouse, low budget feel. How well did they blend Hellboy with that? How successful is this movie as that kind of reboot? John, let's start with you here. What do you think on that?
Well, I think they blended it very well. Again, you hear the word low budget. Like I said, I kind of winced at first. Like, oh,
it's not
is this
that
be
low budget. Let's be honest. 20 million is like Blumhouse is 5 million and under. This is 20,
right?
So it's not that, but yeah,
right. And you definitely felt the budget at times. You were like, ooh, that camera shot was. Oh, they probably could have redone that. There was a few times where you're like, we're a little spoiled with movies these days.
Yes.
But I think they did a good job. And again, I think they picked the right story from jump. The only thing I would say is that. There's a lot of tight panel shots, which Corbin does a lot in the book too. But I think Hellboy in general is about, it's a lot of it's about gothic scenery, and Mignola's art is very, the characters will be this big and it'll be this epic church, So
Right.
I felt like I missed a little bit of that, but I think for the Crooked Band that worked, and hopefully in the future they get a little more budget. Sometimes I think in low budget movies, right, they can't show much of the background. Maybe they don't have a lot. I can't say why, but all I'll say is, for me, I wanted to watch it on the big screen. I didn't get the chance, so I had to watch it on the small screen. So I think that might have hurt the feel a little bit of it for me. But just watching it on the small screen, the first time, I felt like they nailed it. I think they did the best they could with the budget they had. I think the actors they chose were really good for the most part.
Cast is great.
And I forgot his name. John, is it John Kelsey?
Kesey. Yeah, Jack Kesey.
Jack Kesey. Yeah, I was hesitant on him too. His voice is a little gruff. You get used to it. You can tell he's doing a voice, but I thought he nailed it. And the mannerisms, the way he flicks his, the ash off his cigarette, all that kind of stuff. And I think that was a huge part of it.
Well, the Bobby Joe Song character makes fun of his voice, like within those first 10 minutes too. And again, it's sort of like within those first 10 minutes, it takes all the rough edges off, and it allows you to accept what this is and what you're about to get. And then it flows much better after that initial opening. And then but anyway, Matt, go ahead. Your thoughts on this.
So I think that there are parts of it where the budget, there's a lot of it you could see the budget, right? But there are parts where it works and where it doesn't. For instance, the raccoon.
Oh my God.
Like, dude, just get a trained raccoon. I'm sure there's trained raccoons out there. Could you just flown in somebody from a zoo or something?
That's what I thought. And you only need the raccoon for the first 2 feet. Then you can go to the cut away. Like,
I audibly gasped as well. Yeah, at that moment. So it was
that was like a sci-fi channel movie. That was like Sharknado. That raccoon, right? But then when she fills up, that was cool. There are. So I think there are parts of it, like his costume folding, that I actually had to stop the movie, went and got my partner, and was like, hey, you got to see this. Because she's like, I'm not going to watch this movie, right? Because she's not too into Hellboy or whatever.
Right.
I went, I got her like, yeah, see this, and yeah, it's like his abs are folding like latex or whatever, like whatever that material is, So there are parts of it, the spider, but then there are parts of it that actually, like were really well done. I thought, like when she goes flying off the horse, I thought, okay, that looks like she's flying, when the things are coming out of the grave and stuff. There's a lot of parts of it where that budget didn't feel, horrible, as if 20 million is horrible, but
Right.
but I actually wanted to ask you this, Dave, because you're a Ghost Rider apologist, right? For the second
Spirits
movie.
of Vengeance, 100%.
Don't do this. Don't do this.
There is a scene in that.
Matt. Don't do this.
I did really quick because there's a scene in that movie that I felt like they must have run out of budget, right, or something, because I didn't understand what was happening. And it's when he's fighting, and it was a CG thing. I felt like maybe somebody just ran into a computer error or something, and something happened, and I don't know what it was, right? And so he's fighting the group of guys, and he like gets blown up or something, or like knocked into the air for some reason. He freezes in midair, and then just starts spinning around. Remember that? Like, what is that? Is that? I mean, I don't remember Ghost Rider ever doing that. Like, I feel like that was a
movie magic.
Well, I think that's it. It was sort of a Neville Dean and Taylor, because that was when they were doing it as a duo too. And I don't know what actually. This is sort of the next question that we were going to hit. Is the directors, and then I'll answer this in by way of answering this question. So, what were our thoughts of Brian Taylor as a director coming into this? Like, were we familiar with his work before? Were we familiar with the Happy TV show, the mom and dad horror film with Selma Blair and Nick Cage, which were his two solo efforts? He also did a movie called Biker Boys with a Z back in 2003, back in the day, which I also kind of like. And but as Neville Dean and Taylor, I hated the Crank movies once upon a time. I despised them. And then I came to love them.
They're great.
And then I came to love Ghost Rider Spirits of Vengeance. I think there's something about their very punk rock. Oh, and Gamer. Gamer's another one with that was them that I've also come around to loving. They have a it's not traditional punk spirit, but it's this sort of they have a punk energy to everything they do. And they love things that are very dynamic, very in your face, very wild in feel.
Yeah.
Very visceral, yes. And they sometimes do it in a way that quote unquote makes sense. Not that it ever really makes sense, but in a way that makes sense. Sometimes they're doing it. You can tell, I think Ghost Rider Spirits of Vengeance is one of these movies where a lot of the visuals are like, well, that's fucking cool. Let's do that. And they just do it. And that looks wild. Let's just do that. And it's just visual after visual, scene after scene, moment after moment of wild aesthetic that is just outlandish and WTF. But after maybe 30 minutes of it, you're either checking out or you're settling in, and you're like, you know what? This is starting to work. I don't know why, but it's starting to work. And you're along for the ride, and it's a ride. And I do think that even that going up and spinning around is just one of those things where it's a
personal flair.
Moment where it's like things are moving and and then he's landing down, and then big explosion and big chains whipping everywhere and things falling apart. And it's like, that's what they do. If you've ever watched the Crank movies, it's insanity. Especially Crank 2. It's funny. Crank 2 is the one that really convinced me of them and their style. Because Crank 1 was just restrained enough that I was like, this is dumb. Yeah. And then Crank 2 was so outlandish that I was like, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
I was like, I think now it's so beyond the pale. And I think that's what I love about Spirits of Vengeance too, is it's so out there. It's so like, we don't give a F. And we're just doing all of this. They lean in, and I'm like, the
farce, especially with Crank 2.
Yeah.
Crank 2 was just, it's just fantastic. It is, If you're a person who drinks or enjoys a mushroom or cannabis, if you're a person who needs any of those aids to heighten the moment of viewing, fine. But if you are not, if you want to feel as if you are on some substance that alters your mind, watch this film. Crank 2 is just it's the perfect shit show. Wow. It is a perfect shit show. It's so good. The casting's great. It doesn't pretend or aim to do too much. It's just perfectly farce and fantastic.
Yes. Now, I will say Taylor as a solo director is not as wild as Neville Dean and Taylor were together. Neither of them are as wild as they were together. And I think they had a falling out, which is why they don't work together anymore, I think. I actually don't know their story. But Taylor is usually the better of the two. He's made better movies being on his solo career so far, because like Mom and Dad is fun. It's great. It's not wild like Crank and Crank 2 or Spirits of Vengeance. And then I think even in Hellboy, you can see though a lot of his, even in this movie, there are moments like the chapter headings and things like that, and some of the transitions from a thing to another, where there is this edge of visceralness and an edge of like that same kind of punkish energy that like spikes here and there, even in Crooked Man, where a lot of it is very low key and a lot of it is very slow and plotting, because it's meant to be the slow brooding horror. But then you have these spiky moments of just like when the action starts or when we're transitioning from one thing to another, it's got this like fucking death metal-y edge to it that just sort of pops out of nowhere. And I can definitely see that from his Neville Dean and Taylor days, where he always has that kind of somewhere in him. And I do think it spices this up for a low budget action horror movie, which it is still to some degree an action horror film. Like that is the part where I think his version of kineticism works really well with lower budgets. Because it really is just in this style rather than in I have to have great special effects. Because I mean, Spirits of Vengeance, yeah, like you said, the CGI ain't great, but they're like, well, it's not great. Let's just have fun with it. Let's make it wild because it's not going to look good. We know that much. It's not going to look real. So let's just go to town with this shitty CGI. But go ahead, Matt. Do you have any real experience with this director, Neville Dean and Taylor? Have you seen any of these films that we've just listed off?
Yeah, I've seen the Ghost Riders, or just the one, right?
Just the second one was them. Yeah,
I've seen that one. I liked it. I mean, especially it's like you said, like there's a point in the movies I think where it almost like just is like, we're just having fun. It's like you said. I could point out in this movie where I think that point was, and it was the same moment where I'm like, I think I actually really like this movie, and it was the priest, and it was when the priest, so all this crazy shit's going on, and they're fighting zombies, and Crooked Man's come in and all this crap, right? And they're talking about the what's her name? Joy? Was it the woman?
Bobby Joe.
Bobby Joe. Joe is talking about going into the tunnels, right? She's like, yeah, we should go in there and blow it up, And after all this crazy stuff, and the priest all of a sudden just becomes a whole different character. He looks up and he says, "Lady, I think you're out of your motherfucking mind," like that, right? And I was like, I laughed out loud, like I was like, I love this movie. And then every line he said from that point on was amazing. Like it's darker than the devil's asshole. And
and the look she gives him when he says that. Yeah. She gives him this like look like, did you have to say that?
Yeah. It's like the humor all of a sudden clicked at that point. Right. And in the movie made sense to me. Like I almost want to rewatch it again. Yeah. I think it took up until that character doing those lines that I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of like Evil Dead. This is kind of just going for it, just having fun with low budget, with like realizing that this isn't, this grand, spectacular Hellboy movie where he's got the horns growing out and he's, the end of the world and, and all that stuff. This is just a kind of a goofy, but scary sometimes, but fun, monster of the week Hellboy. And that made me really dig it. And not only as a movie, but like as a concept, just having that in the world is kind of what I want Hellboy to be, So that this, I guess Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I was just gonna say, so this director delivering that version, I think is kind of perfect. Like, yeah, the angles he uses aren't amazing. You know, like he uses camera angles that are kind of jarring. There's a lot of like medium shots, and there's like, you know, it's the cam work could have been, I think, better thought out at points. You know, but
They're
it
probably
does have that
hiding a lot
energy.
of that budgetary.
Yeah.
Because when you do those medium shots, it's like, well, don't show the whole
Right.
scene because that looks terrible. We can only do
Yeah.
some shots where it's the whole place is dressed and ready to go, and the rest of it you're
Sure.
sticking in close. Yeah.
I like the little like interludes that they would do with like the witch ball and like, you know, but they only really did the one. Like I thought that would, after that it was going to be kind of a thing. Like they were going to have
right?
that witch explaining. Kinda. They did the bone, but not.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
The lucky bone.
Yeah, the lucky bone. But then after that, it was just over. Like they never came back to it.
Which made me feel like they wanted to split it up into like a Netflix series or something like that.
That was my takeaway.
Yeah.
From
break.
this.
Chapter break.
Yeah.
Which actually would be kind of cool.
So here, okay, this is my point.
Yeah.
It really felt like that $20 million budget was a great way to set a precedent to turn the sort of world of Hellboy and all these, as you said, John, these characters, which are generally more interesting than he is, because he does kind of just, meander through, and he's a jobber. And these other characters generally tend to be so much more interesting for 2 or 3 episodes. So I'm imagining a world where these sort of $200 million that they spent on the first 2 films now, for the foreseeable future, is spent on 10 sort of secondary or, other and more interesting characters like this character, sort of, long-form episodes. Because we've done the spectacle. We've done a great spectacle, and trying to go there again just seems like a pointless endeavor to me. So
I agree. I think this is the right direction. And again, you're right. It could be a pitch. It's kind of went straight to streaming, so they can say, "Hey, Netflix, give us 6 episodes." I will say though, I didn't get the answer. I don't have any experience with the director.
Okay.
I haven't watched any of the movies you mentioned. I don't follow directors really that well, so that helped me go in with no expectations of him.
Right.
But from what you're describing to me, it sounds like they picked the right guy. Because again, Matt said earlier, Sam Raimi, comes to mind. You want that aesthetic again,
100%.
especially for this story. And I think
they blend
picked
genre
the
as
right guy
well.
for the job.
Like you're saying, Dave. Like when you watch any of their content, it's a little bit of everything sometimes, but it does kind of seamlessly come together eventually.
And I will say, probably the ship has sailed on a Hellboy streaming series, just because we're in the era of clawing back budgets on series at this point. Like, streamers no longer want $10 to $20 million episodes like they were spending before. They barely, at this point, they don't even really want to spend $1 million on a single episode. So we'll see what the future brings, but probably that heyday where a Hellboy TV show of this caliber could have happened, probably behind us. Unfortunately, we got to go. We got to do movies going forward from this point.
Yeah, we'll see.
Dallas looks like he might disagree, but we'll see. We're still.
I think
we haven't
this
come out
in and of
the...
itself feels like just an hour and 45-minute long episode that they spent $20 million on for cinematic reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But to be fair, when I look at the quality of this production, it seems even worse than the quality of production for the what's the Gale Ann Hurd series, the zombie series,
Walking Dead.
And maybe this is them just trying to oil the machine so that they can get to a place where they can sort of just get them out the door for $1 million. Right. But we'll see. Right. Either way, I think it's...
Well, I think for a film, the money doesn't go as far because you're not set up to do like multiple episodes where you're just like changing out some players, changing out the director episode to episode, but everything else you've already spent the money on. You're just like continuing on from there. Whereas for a movie, like you're spending all that money in one big blowout go. It's like a pilot episode where there is a lot of expenditure.
This actually feels like a pilot movie for something bigger. And maybe the next one they get 40 million and, hopefully they build from there. If anybody can work in that sci-fi made for TV, but still good, it's Hellboy, right? Yeah. I know we keep saying like we saw the suit bend and stuff, but like he's a man in red paint with his horns sawed off.
Right.
Hellboy himself sets the precedence as soon as you see him. He's ridiculous, right? They can do anything they want. And so to me, that I sometimes get pulled out of scenes, when, like the Starbucks cup and the, Game of Thrones and stuff like that. That shit will pull you out. But, some of the low budget stuff, it's like, I know that a man sat down and wrote this script and he dressed this guy up in red. You kind of know that going in, and kind of with Hellboy again, you can eat a little bit of that because he's just so ridiculous.
I will say the series Happy they did.
Just Taylor, not the other guy.
The first series of that first season of that, I think it only went to 2 or 3 maybe.
Two. Just 2.
The first season was the best thing on television for that period of time. It really truly was, and blended genres.
And he directed the lion's share of episodes. He directed, I think, 7 out of 9 or 7 out of 10.
Great characters.
Something like that.
It blended genre very well. Yeah, kinetic. It was interesting.
I'm gonna have to check that out.
They do a great job with. I guess that wasn't a low budget show, but for sci-fi, it was
based on a comic as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I feel like there are properties that are kind of like what this should aim for, right? Like what was it, The Librarians? These like series of movies, but they're like low budget movies that are on straight to video. Like, and I think for like Hellboy, it could do that for like Shudder or something. Like somebody could come in,
absolutely,
and pick it up as like a 1 or 2 come out a year.
If you could find a way to make it interesting and visually and appealing, yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of comics, there's a lot of stories, there's a lot of lore. You really don't have to dig deep or get too terribly creative, because a lot of the stories are not big in the comics. Like it's only, you can save it. John said maybe the next one they get 40 million, and I'm like, save that for the big finale of some kind.
Give me $1 million episode.
Stick to your low budget guns. I would hope they can do more with less if they keep making it with like the same cast, and they've already created the special effects and the costume and blah blah blah. And it's like, great, now kind of like a TV show. Now we can make the next one for like 10 to 15 million with the same quality that we did for 20. And then eventually you're like, and now we're going to bring it all together. This is the season finale. This is that Games of Thrones episode with all the dragons, right? It's like, now we spend all the money and we go out on a bang and give you the big climax, and sure, save it for that. But I hope they don't just try to climb back to 80 to 100 million per movie, because that's the issue. Is like, I don't think Hellboy can now that we've gotten the Del Toros and they came and went and everyone got to see that, and now we're living in the shadow, I'm not sure it can do that much.
Who was the studio behind them?
So it's like
from the Del Toros.
It was Dark Horse Comics that produced it, but what was the studio? I don't remember.
It's probably
Lionsgate.
Yeah. They did his other. Yeah, that's probably Lionsgate. Okay.
Yeah.
But and I think you're right. Maybe they don't, and maybe Mignola, he's not a young man anymore. That he wants to make his Hellboy movie. Maybe this is enough for him. We'll see. And that it doesn't have to be anything else. And if any movie, I know movies don't bring comic readers in. We always talk about that as comic, supporters. If anything this can, right? I think they did it exactly how, if you want to see the rest of the story, come on over to the comics. We'll probably never finish it in film because it's too big in scale, but you could really jump straight from this into where the comics are at this point in the story and be like, yes, this is amazing. I'll continue this,
Well, on the note of comics and on the note of scripts, and Mignola and Golden having written the original script, now this also has a co-writing credit by the director, Brian Taylor. And this being a U.S. production, which would have been under union guidelines, and according to WGA rules, for him to get a co-writer credit, that script has to be at least 51% him in the final end. So we know their script got heavily rewritten by Taylor, if it worked out that way, or they co-wrote it together, at which point a lot of it was him to begin with. I'm not sure. But a few things that definitely deviate from the comic. So Bobby Joe Song is a character that does not exist in the Crooked Man comic, right? They created her just for the movie. Personally, I think that was a great idea. I can already see why, because it's like, oh, all the female characters in this are like witches and condemned
Right.
people. It's like, we should probably have one female character that is not just that. And like the witchy sycophants to the crooked man and things like that. It's like, we need someone who's heroic and female here as well. Why don't we make sure we put her in there? And I do think it balances out and gives more for the characters to do with each other, because then it gives like the priest and her something to do while Hellboy and the other main male character are off doing their own thing. And it really balanced that story out in ways that the comic didn't necessarily need to, but the comic was a bit more contained. So there's that difference. And then in the comic story, of course, the climax of the comic essentially is the middle piece of the movie with the shovel, right? And the where that's kind of, there's a little bit of a denouement in the comic after that, with a little bit more that I actually was surprised they didn't put into the movie, because the climax we got, I don't know about you guys, but it was my one beef with the movie, is the climax was very anticlimactic, to the point where when it was over and then they really did start to just sort of like wrap things up, I was like, wait, that's it? That was literally it. That was them defeating the crooked man. I was like, I liked everything even leading up to that. It just seemed kind of random scenes and then a moment where they beat him. And you're just sort of like, oh.
And that point, Dave, is,
everyone else is...
and that point, Dave, is why after watching this, I thought, maybe this is just a cinematic sort of pilot. Maybe this is them testing the water for something that...
Yeah, but it's still a movie. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I mean, in terms of a criticism, it's a movie. No.
Here,
if you're releasing it as a standalone movie...
You're not wrong. I'm not just...
You're talking about when they go up the hurricane and they go to his house and then they put Effie in the bridle?
No, I'm really just like throwing... so without spoiling too much, just the quick sudden use of the witch bomb.
Oh, yeah.
And then that was it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh.
Yeah.
And I was like, he's not more powerful than that? Like, that was all it literally took? Like, why did we go through any of this?
I will say that part is in the comic, because I didn't remember a lot of the key points either, so I read it afterwards. Yeah. And I was surprised how much they stuck to the comic. And maybe you're right. At that point, maybe they should have said, well, we've been pretty loyal. We can clean this up. Because I think what they added, actually, most cinema, right, you go, oh, they added all this stuff. I think you're right. Like, adding Bobby Joe, at first I kind of rolled my eyes. It's like, oh, they're adding a love interest. But there is a Hellboy in love arc, which I think they kind of shoehorned in here, where it's very cute when Hellboy, falls for a woman and he's still kind of an immature guy and doesn't really know what to do. Mm-hmm. And I like that part of Hellboy. So, but the ending I thought it was faithful to the comic, maybe to a fault, but they go back and he's now in a weakened state. And then again, it's like they finish him off. They added the part of him hallucinating, to allude to some other things. But then the end is with the scene with Effie. That is the end of the comic. So you're right. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the best, but I was kind of like, oh, it's nice that they kind of wrapped it up in the same way.
So in the comic, one of my favorite things about the Crooked Man story is in the comic. So they beat him at the church. They go to the house, the hurricane, and he's not like the Crooked Man anymore. He's like this disgusting blobby.
They didn't show that very well. That he's weakened.
Yeah. He's like this gross crab looking thing that's just kind of like, please don't kill me. And then he's just like, nope, we're doing, and just kills him. Right? Like,
well, and he's not, they don't even show him weak. I mean, I didn't think they showed him as weakened. Like, they show up to his house and it's like booby trapped and like they're having, like, it's almost like his place of power. And then all of a sudden he shows up and they just do away. And you're just sort of like, but why? Wait, you were winning essentially right there. Like, why did you even show up if you're this? It was a little.
They didn't have the budget to show him as a blob of insects. So yeah, I get it. Like, they were supposed to be like, you're right. It wasn't the best. No. I mean, the Crooked Man really was Mike Mignola saying, Richard Corbin, draw whatever you want. I've always felt like that. He was like, I'll do whatever you want. So I've always felt like he had a heavy hand in it. So maybe this was trying to stay as faithful to that. But you're right. It wasn't the best ending. But again, for me, I was like, that's cool, because you don't get that from other other movies and genres, Hellboy is just so weird, and that was a very weird ending.
I do get that, and I do think I agree with you in theory in that, like, sometimes anticlimaxes can be beautifully done, like in that way where you're expecting something, it subverts that expectation, and it does it in a beautiful way. I just don't think this is one of them. So this is
It
one
definitely
where
wasn't a
it
satisfying
just fell flat
ending.
for me.
It was not a satisfying ending, but
I felt like
do-
it was, again, only because I'm a homer for it, so I was like,
Yeah.
I liked it.
Totally. I do think it was a good delivery of the Hellboy. All right, time to clock out of my day. Kind of like, well, that's it for you. Like,
Right.
And
that's
so
the end of the
many
workday. 5 o'clock's hit.
Yeah.
He's clocking
Job
out.
is
You know what I
And
mean?
so
Like,
many of the comics, like, they end with, like, they kind of figured out. Now, this one, at least, they alluded to the witch ball. Some of them, it's just like they figure out this very magical way to, do
Right.
this. Because it's like, we only got 12 pages. Wrap
Right.
up this story, which, again, I like, because that feels like a comic come to life to me,
Well, and they did the whole witch ball thing earlier in the movie where they're like breaking
Yeah.
down everything that the witch ball is and how to make it. And that exists in the
Yeah.
comic too, in this insane panel, which has
Right.
like 250 words,
Yep.
in this
Yeah.
one giant panel. And they explain the whole thing of the witch ball. So there are a lot of tit for tat between the comic and the movie, but there was something where it works in the comic and something about the way they rejiggered it here where it just, as an ending, it was rushed and felt very flat for me. That is not to say, I mean, like I said, this is still like the second best Hellboy, and I still had to go rewatch the first one to make sure even of that. So this is still a strong showing, I think, for this new direction of Hellboy, but it's got some flaws.
yeah, the ending was almost like an epilogue. You know what I mean? Like the
Yes.
big battle with the church.
which works in a comic and not necessarily in a movie,
unless
right?
you're
You don't
setting up a
necessarily get
series of films that will do this and stay native
let's
and
do that.
faithful to some of the other
because that will
arcs.
give Hellboy his own feel, like that will give him
Right.
his own
Right.
uniqueness.
No, still got to disagree
I
with
know it's
that.
coming.
No,
And I'll
no,
tell you
not as a
I'll tell you
movie.
another reason.
If it's a pilot and the next episode drops next week, sure.
No.
But
we're
not
calling
like
it
this.
cinematic
Not 2 years
pilot.
from
Where
now.
this is the new. This is a
Right.
this is
Nope.
a new thing I'm coining right here.
This
It's
is
a
the new
cinematic
streaming
pilot.
this is actually the first 3 episodes.
Well,
Well,
as a
Next 3 episodes.
cinematic pilot, it's a bad idea and
It's a
doesn't work.
cinematic pilot. It's coming. It's coming. Just real quick, they shot in, what was it, Bulgaria, I think, and their production
Mhm.
window was late March to early May, so about 5 or 6 weeks. So they're in and out, which you can tell based on this film, of course.
Yeah, you can
But
tell.
again, that's
That makes
just
sense.
another feather in the cap of the idea and notion that it is going to be a cinematic pilot series. And that is my TED Talk. Thank you. Come again.
I could see that because, again, I think sometimes they get bogged down too much
Yeah.
and all that stuff. Like you said, sometimes you just get to a point and you're like, this is a movie about a big red guy. Let's just throw it on the screen and see if people like it,
Yeah.
So I kind of like it. But again, with that budget, I don't know they're going to be able
Yeah,
to
no,
keep.
probably not. It's all
Jack, you see
experimental. I mean,
long-term,
they're trying to.
The
streamers are trying to figure out what the
too,
hell to do with their content. I mean, this film
Right,
alone,
right, yeah.
what was it? $20 million budget was supposed to get a cinematic or theatrical release, and all of a sudden it's on the streamer like a pilot. So, I mean,
You guys follow film more than me. Is that rare for a movie to get all these foreign market releases and not a U.S. release?
Totally common.
very common now. Yeah, for sure. Very common now.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
I mean, we were talking to Ryland Grant. The episode just dropped today.
That's right.
Everyone go listen to it
guys.
on Haunted Heart. And he was saying how, the Wolves movie with George Clooney and Brad Pitt, like, it was a shock to the actors that did not go theatrical. That was not the plan. Same thing with the Amazon Roadhouse remake with Jake Gyllenhaal. 11th Hour, not theatrical, just dumping on streaming. Like, these things are happening more and more as we go. They just don't always announce it, or they announce it as like, this drops on Amazon at this time, but no one knew the thing was coming until they announced that. So I think with Hellboy, they were holding out for theatrical, and then they weren't able to get, because theaters have to actually accept you into that window with whatever else is also coming out, and it needs to be something that makes sense to you, like how much what is the deal to get this window at this time of year and to get X many screens, and can you recoup all the costs you're going to be spending on marketing, and how much the theaters are going to take on opening weekend, which is more than 50% on opening weekend. Let me tell you, it only drops down after opening weekend. So it's
and I also think upon review,
Um,
they realized that this film would have been laughed out of theaters in the first week.
Yeah.
maybe
That might have
maybe.
made it worse for streaming and everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, because it wouldn't look as good on the big screen just because of the lower budget.
And the comedy isn't.
And
There's
whereas
certain
on the small
shots,
screen,
Yeah.
I think it coheres a little bit
great,
better.
great.
But-
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, we are at the end of our show where we are going to reveal what we're all going to drink while watching Hellboy the Crooked Man, or did drink while watching Hellboy the Crooked Man, because we pretty much all watched it yesterday, as far as I know, or the day before. So let's start. John, just in case you have to bail, because I know you have an out. Let's start with you. What did you drink while watching Hellboy the Crooked Man?
Well, I did watch it during the day, so I did not drink. I know that doesn't preclude a lot of people from drinking, but for
We
myself,
don't know our audience, John.
but this may be a little bit snobby, but if I was to drink with it, from what I understand, you can't see if you're watching.
Ooh.
If
Look
you're
at
watching,
this guy.
Look at
this
this,
is actually-
guy.
Look at
I
this guy.
I did not watch it, but if I
Wow.
We are
watched the
seeing
2000,
a Hellboy bottle
Wait.
for all the
This is-
listeners, because remember, John,
this
no
is-
visuals.
that's what I was trying to get to. I know
Yeah.
you can't see it at home, so I'm holding up Hellboy Hellwater Cinnamon Whiskey.
Yeah.
This is what I would watch when I watched the 2019 one. I will
Nice.
get another bottle of this. It is horrible.
Can you
You
get
know
on
what, John? I'm
I
going
don't
to
think
join
you
you in
can.
that. I'm gonna get some cinnamon whiskey and
But
watch
this is basically bad Fireball, and Fireball's already bad.
True.
So if I watch the 2019, even though Matt has said nice things, it makes me want to watch it. I would probably bust this out. So no, I would not drink that with Hellboy. What I would drink is this amazing beer set, which you also can't see.
Yeah, so I have
Nice.
those, but I can't find them anymore because they were limited
Hellboy
edition.
beer set.
Oh,
The
wow.
Hellboy
yeah.
beer set, which I do have a couple that left that I was holding. A buddy of mine who's a huge Hellboy fan, we plan to watch the movie together soon. We're going to bust out the rest of them for that. I think I have the Hellboy one is maple syrup
Yeah.
beer, and then there's a spicy one that's the
Mhm.
Liz one, and I can't remember the sixth one, but I've been waiting a long time. We drank this first bottles in celebration of a comic we made together, and now with this great Hellboy movie that I know he and I are going to love together. That's what I would pair it with. I feel bad for other people. It was very hard to get. It was such a pain in the
Yeah.
ass, and you can't get it anymore. I hope they do it again because the Dark Horse and the Hellboy community do a pretty good job.
Well,
with their
there
swag.
are Walking Dead wines still, also terrible.
Yes.
Just know that going in, but they exist as sort of adjacent. Since we mentioned Walking Dead earlier, and I was like, yeah, which does have that. What do they call that? Not altered reality. The thing where you get an app and then you put it on the label and the label comes to life
Yeah.
and starts to move and all that fun
Oh
stuff.
yeah, AR. Yeah.
Whatever AR, yeah. I always
Augmented
forget what it's
reality.
augmented reality. Thank you.
I will say
So all the
Johan
Walking Dead.
Johan is my favorite character in the book, so maybe coincidentally, but the citrus wit Johan Kraus was probably the best. So I don't know if the new. I'll check back in and if the other three top that one, but I remember that one being the
There we
best
go.
by far.
Yeah, this one not having major studio backing, probably there won't be a lot of merchandising on this Hellboy, which is the downside of it being a low budget, relatively.
Well, the good thing is that Mignola has a lot of control over all his
Mhm.
stuff, so he whores himself out to everything anyway. So there's
Yes.
always Hellboy merchandise. You don't have to
Yes.
worry about the movie.
although the Hellboy merchandise is, they can do comic. They can't
Right,
do
right,
any of the
right.
movie images, right?
Right, right.
And the same thing,
Which is
because I know Walking Dead, Robert Kirkman is the same way. Like, he can
Yeah.
merchandise the
Right.
comic images, but he does not have the rights to
Serious.
any of the TV characters.
By the way,
Any of the live
Gail,
or their
Gail Ann
likenesses.
Hurd follows me on Twitter now. She
She
regularly.
She followed him, what, last week?
I was like, wait,
Dallas?
what? Just anyway, go on.
All right, so Matt, how about for you? What are you drinking with this?
So I was trying to get those beers because I had them like when they first came out, like 2019 probably, right, for the last
Mhm.
movie. I couldn't find them, even though I live in Portland, where Dark Horse and Rogue Ale is, and nobody had them. So I tried to get the next best thing, which is this 19 Crimes. It's one of these augmented
Yes.
Frankenstein 19 Crimes Frankenstein wine that was cheap. It was right there at the
They
grocery
have great
store,
labels.
and I was like,
They
you know
have
what?
very fun labels. Very fun
Yeah.
label art.
They do have great labels. I saw those. I thought about them. I'm like, I can't bring
That's
myself.
crazy.
I'm too
I
much
did
of a
too.
fine wine guy. I'm like, I can't do 19 Crimes. But I saw that. I think that Frankenstein one is what, $10.99? I
Yeah,
think is what it was where I
yeah.
am. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a wine drinker, but I was like, it's got Frankenstein on it, so I was like, that'll work.
Fair
I guess.
That'll do.
All right, Dallas, what are you doing, man?
Okay, all right. So I went with I'm a glutton for punishment sometimes, and the first 15 minutes of this film, I actually decided what I was going to drink. And the reason I should say the second 15 minutes, so like 30 minutes in, I was like, okay, I know what I want for this. It was something that's drinkable, but not much else going on. It's a little passive and unfocused for my taste. Jammy, but not good jammy. It's kind of like Dave knows what I'm talking about. It's a medium finish. It just was. It was wine, technically, just like this film was sort of a Hellboy film, technically. So I went with the Josh Sellers Cabernet Sauv from 2019.
I mean, look, budget wines for a budget movie, right?
Yeah, honestly, that was my thinking. I was like, you know what? I'm down here. I just got punched in the face. I might as well kick myself in the nuts too. We're here, you know. So, but just say I say that just to let me make this disclaimer, a la Matt. I actually enjoy the film on its own, just not in comparison to the others.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I went all out,
God.
and I decided to pair this. So watching this sort of folk horror tinged Hellboy, it really got me thinking about like what other kind of folk horror that I love and what places a wine can come from that are very like has folklore and folk horror associated with it. And I went for a wine from the island of Corsica. So Corsica is an island in the Mediterranean right off the coast of France. It is one of the 18 regions of France, even though it is in the Mediterranean. And I got a 2020 Yves Leccia E Croce Patrimonio Rouge, which, so I'll tell you why the Corsican, I've been fascinated by Corsican folklore and folk horror for a long time because I have this book. And I'll mention the book here in just a minute. Let me finish talking about the wine though. But it is, so one of the icons of Corsica's Patrimonia region, the winemaker is Yves Leccia. He followed in the footsteps of his dad and grandfather working for the family estate. In 2004, he left that domain, created his own property, alongside his wife Sandrine, whose family are winemakers in Alsace, to focus on a single terroir he felt was the top in Patrimonio, which is the terroir of E. Croce. Croce, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It's the letter E, space, C-R-O-C-E. So like crocodile, but with an E. E. Croce. It sits on thin chalk soil above a thick bedrock of pure schist. Yves is a firm believer in the idea that if you want to do something right, you do it yourself. So this is a theme with me lately, Dallas. He tends to his vines alone and his own cellar alone. He's another single auteur winemaker that gets no help from anyone, which isn't entirely true because in the same breath, his wife Sandrine does help during harvest time.
Yet another guy
so she will pitch in as needed. Exactly. So you got to shoehorn in the new character, right? In the story. Like he wrote the script and he's like, it's just me. Right. And then the writer's like, no. We got to put a woman in there too. Come on.
That's right.
But she actually is always there. But he and his wife are like a two-person show, and no one else assists them in this. It's a very small plot, but it is here in the States. You can find it. I found it. Again, K&L Wines is one of the places where you can find a lot of wines online. You can search this online. I'll have a link down below. Yep. He's known for winemaking. He's also celebrated for being the founding member of A Filetta, the letter A, space, Filetta, a legendary and proudly nationalistic Corsican polyphonic singing group, which you can find on Spotify. I found them. I listened to some of the music. And his family name, Leccia, is Corsican for oak. But the name is very ironic because he never uses any oak with his wine. In fact, he's never even allowed wood into his cellar. So this E. Croce Rouge is a blend of 90% of a native grape to Corsica called Nielucciu, Niellucciu. That will be spelled down below in the description. Trust me, don't try, guys. But 90% Nielucciu, local indigenous grape, likely related to Sangiovese, which I can totally see because this has a little bit of a Chianti flavor to it here, and 10% Grenache, Now, I chose this wine. I think it matches Hellboy. It's got a definite depth to it. It's a red, it's strong, but it's also got a tartness and a sourness to it. So it's fruity, but fruit tarty. It's not too high in acidity, but it's got some acidity in there. So it's got a little bit of a bite. And the fruitiness and that tartness and sourness and that little bite of acidity, it matches this sort of slower, but still with some action set pieces. Like, it's got this horror of like a place in the countryside that has soured with this sort of infestation of like witches and the crooked man and selling your soul and all this bad behavior, and everyone's trying to get out it. And it's like, this is what the land is it's like, it's got a bite, it's got a sour note to it. It really matched what was going on in this movie for me. And one of the reasons Corsica really came to mind while I was watching this is I had this book for a long, long time. It's this very small, like 100-page book that is a nonfiction book about a Corsican myth called the Dream Hunters. And the Dream Hunters are really unknown outside of Corsica. If you don't live there, you've never heard of this. And this one little thin 100-page book is the only time I've ever even heard of them. They're called the Mazzari there, and they, at night, they go hunting, or dream that they go hunting, to kill an animal with whom they recognize a human face upon or within. The next day they wake up and announce that person they saw on that animal they killed in the dream is going to die within the year. And so the Mazzari are something that apparently way back in the day they actually existed, and they would announce your death. That's a Hellboy story. And there are the Signori, and the Signori are people that they are life givers. They practice the folk medicine. They practice and then they can free you from the curse of the quote unquote evil eye, which is when, I believe the evil eye is when the Mazzari have marked you for death. And so it's Mazzari versus the Signori, and they are constantly at war over who dies and who lives on the island of Corsica. And I've always, through dream hunting, and I fucking love that myth. And so it's always been one that stuck with me. And when I was watching this movie, I was like, I actually don't know much about Appalachia, even though I'm American. So I was like, you know what? This popped into mind, and it's a winemaking country. And I was like, I think I got to go with this for a folk horror.
Well, that sounds
like
it would make an excellent installment for a following episode of a cinematic series based on the cinematic pilot that was this film.
Oh, yeah. He had to sneak that one back in there. I love how thoughtful you are about your stuff. Just drink whiskey, Dave. That's what...
Yeah, Dave, I don't know if you saw this. Mine's got a picture of Frankenstein on it, though.
But no, in all seriousness, Hellboy wouldn't care.
Hellboy would probably prefer the Frankenstein bottle.
Drink whatever you want. Hellboy says drink what you want, as long as you're drinking with skeletons.
That's right.
Hellboy.
That's right.
There you go.
Beautiful.
There you go. All right, folks. Thank you so much for listening. Once again, this has been... who have our guests been? Matt Harding and John. What's your last name, John?
That's right. Westhoff. You really are John W. in my brain, by the way.
I know. I saw John W. and I blanked, and I was like, wait, what the fuck? Jon Westoff and Matt Harding. John, where can people follow you online if they want to follow you?
I am Part-Time Comix. That's Comix with an X at the end. If you search that and anything, it'll lead you to our Linktree, our store envy, our Instagram. Anywhere you search Part-Time Comix with an X.
Comics with 3 X's if you want to find them at night.
Hey, don't go that far.
If you want to find the other John.
Although now that you
exactly, right?
I should add that.
And Matt Harding, where can people find you online if they'd like to follow you?
Just www.matthardingart, or you can follow me, Matt Harding Art, on Instagram or Twitter or whatever.
Cool.
Beautiful. And we will have
Pretty
clickable
simple.
links down below in the description for both of those, for both these guys. And once again, folks, this has been Wine And. We will be back next week for another wine and entertainment pairing for your entertainment. We will check you then. Happy October, Spooktober. Until next week.
Later, guys.
Ciao for now.